Welcome to HR Voices, a podcast for independent HR and people professionals and the businesses they support. HR Voices is brought to you by the expert team at HR Independence Limited. We hope you enjoy.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of HR Voices podcast. I am your host, Mary Asante. And with me here today, I've got the amazing Linda Gent. Hi, Linda.
Hi, Mary. How are you this morning?
I'm all right, thanks. How are you?
Yeah, all good, all ready to go.
Excellent. So I've known Linda for a long time now, and we're going to be talking to you today about going from limiting beliefs to building confidence. So Linda is a coach, and I will let Linda introduce herself and tell us a bit more about herself. So over to you, Linda.
Thank you, Mary. So yeah, I'm Linda, as Mary introduced me. I am an executive coach. I got my coaching qualification a couple of years back, but actually I've been coaching for many years. My background is in HR, mainly in the NHS, so lots of health sector background. I'm also a fellow of the Chartered Institute of Personnel and Development, and really focused in on coaching and helping people to achieve what they can in their life and work, because there's two sides of that coin. And really excited to be here today to talk about something that crops up an awful lot in coaching conversations. Sometimes guests will come with limiting beliefs and what's perhaps otherwise known as imposter syndrome, and sometimes they will come because they recognize that they're lacking in confidence. So this episode is bringing those two elements together.
Excellent. Very exciting topic. And I think I do agree with you. A lot of the time, coaching is around helping people to build their confidence, isn't it?
Yeah.
Whether they are at that point in their career where they feel that they are not as good as they ought to be, or whether they are at the point of their career where they've been promoted to a point where they're out of their comfort zone to the point where they feel, can I really do this? And they need that confidence boost to be able to do that. And sometimes to move on from where they are as well. So very important topic, and one that I hope a lot of our listeners can relate to, whether through the work they do or through their personal life as well. So yeah. So Linda, then, for anyone who's listening and we've piqued their interest a bit and they go, "Ooh, that's an interesting conversation." And I honestly do, I know it is. What is limiting belief?
So limiting beliefs is an element of what's known as imposter syndrome or imposter feelings. It's known by various different ways. And imposter syndrome was first founded by Pauline Clance and colleagues back in the 1970s. And I think what's really interesting to know about imposter syndrome and limiting beliefs, because the two work together for me, is that it's fairly common. Over between 60 and 70% of people in the workplace experience these feelings. And it can perhaps be defined as if you hear yourself saying, I'm not good enough, I can't do this, I don't know why they've given me this job, I'm going to fail. It's terminology like that or self-talk like that, which is limiting belief. And mainly it's about the, I think I can't do that, or I'm not good enough. So I think that's a good kind of definition.
Thank you very much, Linda, for that definition. And I think one thing worth pointing out is that a lot of the time, the strongest negative voices are our own, isn't it? They are our own internal voice. And the moment you start saying some of the phrases that you just said, which is, I can't do this. I am not good enough. Am I worthy of this? You start doubting yourself to the point where it's almost impossible sometimes to do the task ahead or to achieve what lies ahead of you because you are very convinced that there's no way you'll be able to do that.
Yeah.
Why do people sort of get these negative thoughts, limiting beliefs, and doubts? And yeah.
I think sometimes it is anchored in childhood, even, just to bust any further myths, coaching coaching isn't counseling, but actually if you build that relationship with your client, you can dig underneath what are the surface level problems, which are about confidence, and so lacking confidence and not being able to boost themselves really. And sometimes, as I say, it can go back to early childhood. So I recently coached a client who has dyslexia, and she was told very early on at school that she'd never amount to anything, and that still sits in her mind. So, we had some really good conversations about trying to break that down and almost getting rid of that belief, but it's really ingrained in them. One of the case studies that I've read was somebody who was a solicitor who similar thoughts and definitely had that those limiting beliefs to a great extent actually, and really affected how people saw her in her work, because she not only had her self-talk going on, but she used to say those things out loud, and for her that went back to failing her 11 plus. And it was only once that was surfaced that it came to the fore. But that's not to say that it's always ground in something from childhood. It could be a bad experience in a workplace. I deal a lot in cases where people are bullied or harassed at work and there's some discomfort. So I work in the conflict management space as well. And bullying absolutely can knock your confidence and, really limit your self-esteem. And even though you might be the recipient of some bad behavior, it's our self-talk that gets us into that place, and it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy because we hear ourselves saying, I'm not good enough, I can't do this, I'm going to get found out. And I'm sure there's many listeners to the podcast who have touched Brené Brown's work. And one of the things that she says is question yourself. What is the story you're telling yourself? And sometimes you just have to be able to break that down. So it can come from a number of different ways. And sometimes it's important to find out what sits underneath that. And sometimes it's better to not get into that level of detail, because it could potentially be traumatizing for people to go back to an area where, something has occurred that makes them feel like that. And then it's trying to find ways of breaking that down and helping them to put it to one side. And there'll be definitely some people that will say, well, it never quite goes away. Even when I've done some really hard work around my limiting beliefs, it still pops up from time to time, because it might be what's referred to as a character trait as well, which that's not to say that, again, it can't be addressed or it can't be proved. But if it's a character trait that's in us, I mean, you'll have heard the term where people say, oh, I'm a glass half empty or I'm a glass half full person. So where you have a positive attitude to life and to challenges, I suppose, and that's one of the things that will really make the difference on that. But you can, as I say, we can address that through coaching and really looking at, what harm it's doing. But there was an interesting bit I read, which was that example I gave you a moment ago about the lady who'd failed her 11 plus. She wasn't quite ready in her coaching to address her self-limiting beliefs. And that in itself had to be broken down in the first place. And it had become part of her persona. So not just her character traits, but part of her persona. And so to get her to a place where she could not get rid of her limiting beliefs, but actually manage them, was quite difficult, because it meant that she would have to have let go of certain things. And sometimes people are not ready to let go of what has become their character.
Thank you, Linda. I think you've touched on a number of key points there. The first of which is sometimes when you're coaching somebody, you will have to get to the bottom or the root cause of what those beliefs are, or how they came about. And other times you can try, but you may not get to it because the individual may find it too traumatizing. There are certain times that they are so ingrained that they become part of the individual's persona, or they are as embedded as their personal, what can be considered as their personality traits. And I think each of those are quite key. And when it comes to coaching, and as you're aware, I do coaching as well. And it's very important that there is a level of trust between the coach and the client to be able to break down some of these barriers so that you can begin to support the person. And I think one important thing is also, if the individual is not ready, coaching is not something done to people, is it? It's a journey you go through with the person. So if they're not ready, you can't necessarily drag them along. You cannot help them much. The individual needs to be ready. So I think when you get to the point, as the case study you've just used, where the individual is not ready to start working on themselves, that is probably more important than anything else, which is working with them to get them to the point where they feel ready to start working on themselves. Right.
And that's quite hard, as I find it, that quite hard as a coach, when somebody's, almost agreed, or they've decided for themselves that they want something to change. And so they've signed up for a coaching program, yet they still present in a way where they don't feel quite ready. And you can, certainly I feel it. And actually in this case study that I read, the coach at the time was quite impatient for things to change. And I think it's too easy to forget that people need to be ready for that change, don't they?
I think it's very interesting because you look at it from the point of view as a coach. Your client comes to you and they're looking for an outcome, a results, right? So if they've signed up to 6 sessions and you're spending 3 or 4 out of those sessions getting the person ready, then you will feel, oh my goodness,
yes,
I'm not going to achieve anything by the end of these sessions. And they are then going to turn around to potentially say, again, be ready for this. Good enough as a coach for them. So they themselves will start going into, actually, have I been able to guide this person or to work with them to be able to get to the outcome that we set out to achieve?
definitely.
But that is really important, because if the individual is not ready, then you probably will go through the motion of having several sessions, and at the end of it, they probably wouldn't get as much out of the sessions with you as they would if you actually went through the motion of, okay, so why are we feeling the way we're feeling, or why are we doing things the way we are doing things, to be able to help them move forward. And in terms of the conversation today, which is, how do you go from limiting beliefs to starting to build your confidence?
So there's a number of ways that you can do that. And I think, just to kind of finish off on that last point, is that kind of speaks to our own limiting beliefs as coaches, doesn't it? We go into this field of work because we want to help people, and we want people to appreciate and acknowledge, the heights that they can reach. And it can get a bit frustrating when things are not moving fast enough, because we set ourselves up to say, okay, well, in 6 sessions, we can achieve this wonderful thing. But actually, by the time people come into coaching, depending on what age they are, but let's take an average of somebody who's 35 to 40. I always say, from a psychological perspective, they've spent 40 years learning how to operate in the way that they're operating. Why on earth do we think in 6 sessions, whether they're an hour or 90 minutes or 2 hours, that we can just change all of that and, fix the issue? So I think one of the things that I like to do in my practice is I'm very keen to use positive psychology and get people to look at their strengths. So they're just a couple of methods, I suppose, that I tend to use for that. And then some people will come to coaching having done a psychometric assessment. And I know one of your earlier podcasts was about using psychometric assessments, and they can be great for helping people to really see themselves in a way that they perhaps don't see when they hold the mirror up to themselves, because it gets in a little bit deeper. And actually, if you use a 360 one, it's even better, because you can then begin to see how other people see you. So just thinking about what people's strengths are, and there's some psychometric tools and instruments out on the market that specifically look at strengths. But actually, even without that, I've certainly had some clients where I've encouraged them to think about, 3 positive things at the end of the day. So I'm a great believer in reflection. So if you can do some reflection, and by that I don't mean sit there doing some navel gazing and, increase those self-fulfilling prophecy about, oh, everything went really bad today. In fact, I use a term which is catastrophizing. How much are you catastrophizing the thing that has occurred? And I'm just reminded, things pop into my mind from time to time. I used to use this model called the sumo man, and the sumo man stands for shut up and move on.
Right.
Because I think I was one of those people that used to sit there and navel gaze and think about how dreadful things were. And it's when you realize the sumo man helps you to think, okay, how important is this going to be tomorrow? How important is it going to be in 6 months' time? Who's even going to notice in a year's time? And then you start to think about, well, actually, I am catastrophizing. So sometimes it's breaking down those things. With some clients, I've said, if they're of that ilk and they find it really hard to find positive things, is just to say to them, okay, so tell me 3 things that have happened over the last month that are good. And I had one client who said, well, actually, I can't think of anything. And I said, okay, well, let's go back to our bit of intro that we did today, where you told me the things that have happened since the last time we met. Pull some of that stuff out. And then they start to create that feeling of, oh yeah, actually that went quite well. And they start to make some baby steps to recognizing some more positive things that have happened, whether it's in the last week, the last day, the last 6 months. And then with some clients, I might speak to them about journaling. Some people like to journal, and there's different ways that you can do that. One of my very early clients, actually, she said, oh God, I used to do that all the time. And actually, I encourage my daughter to do it. So why don't I do it? So journaling is a very good way of getting, your thoughts out of your head and onto a piece of paper. And as I say, some people find that quite cathartic way of releasing those things. But for me, there's also that habit of, when the day is ended, is just think about 3 positive things that have happened during the day and get into that habit of thinking about those things. And it, within a matter of days, people's mindset switches to thinking about much more positive things. And if you can do that in a way where you're sharing that with other people, I think that's great. Now, not everybody, has that opportunity to share with others, which is why journaling might work for some people. So there's journaling and thinking about those positive things. But again, you have to get people to start to make some baby steps, really, and find what works for them. So that's a bit about positivity. So I introduce some concepts around positive psychology using the PERMA model and the work by Martin Seligman.
Right.
So using that and breaking down those things. And there's also some exercises that I might get people to do, which is, write down the things that you believe about yourself. There's something I use called the post-it note exercise. So write down on some post-it notes the things that you believe about yourself, and then come back later and then have another look at those with a fresh mind. And then those that divide them up into positives and negatives. And if you look at the negative things, then question yourself about whether they're actually true. So where is that coming from? And quite often a limiting belief will come from fear. And so I love this mnemonic, which is fear, which is false evidence appearing real. So what's the evidence behind things? And one of the things that I read in preparation for coming into this was almost about putting your feelings to one side and focusing on the facts. And I can see how that could help, but actually
Yeah,
I think feelings are really important.
absolutely.
So using a reflective cycle like Gibbs or Orton, for example, there's plenty of reflective cycles out there to use, but it's about thinking about something, how something occurred, what was in my mind at that time, but then also how did I feel about that thing? And then what happened as a result of my thoughts and my feelings. So I don't necessarily agree that you can separate out the two. I get the point about focusing on the facts, but your feelings are quite powerful things.
Absolutely. And I think the facts help you get to what the underlying issues are, isn't it?
Yeah,
Let's say the fact that you were bullied at
yeah,
a workplace,
yeah,
that is a fact, okay?
yeah,
And how you felt when you were bullied is as a result of the bullying.
yeah.
I get your point about actually the two are inseparable
Mm,
because every time you feel that way, whether consciously or unconsciously, you've got that bullying and then whatever happened going on in the background.
yeah,
And so your reaction to that is as a result of how you're feeling or how you
yeah,
felt every time that particular incidents come to mind. And it
yeah,
goes on enough without you either seeking help, sorting it out, or whatever. It starts to solidify
yes.
a certain sort of way of thinking, acting, etc., in your mind
Mm,
that then becomes something that you probably do or start to do unconsciously when you
mm,
are faced with certain situations or certain elements. It's your manager consistently telling you you are not good enough, you're not a good performer, you're not this, you're not that, etc. When you're faced with a particular work-related issue, your first thinking is, oh gosh, there's no way I'm going to be able to do this because
mm,
I can't do it. And why can't you do it? Because my
yeah,
manager says so. And because my manager saying it, it must be true that I can't do it. And whilst
mm,
in some cases those are valid, in some other cases, they may well not be very valid. And so you need to be able to, okay, is it I can't really do this work? Maybe if I can't do this work, why can't I do the work? And it's because maybe I'm not experienced enough. I need to do a bit more training. I need to do this. I need to do that. Then you start taking steps to ensure that you overcome whatever the issue is instead of giving up altogether because someone says you can't do it.
definitely. And I like to use framing.
Mm.
Uh, to help people break out that cycle. And there's a very simple, sometimes the simplest thing are the greatest things. There's a simple word that I tend to tag on to the end of conversations or sentences like that, which is, I can't do it yet. And when you're learning something new, and quite often these limiting beliefs and the lack of confidence happens when people get promoted, it's more common in senior people than it is in junior people. That's not that junior people don't have that feeling. And if you think about, when you move into the workplace, you almost know nothing about the world of work because our education system doesn't really prepare us particularly well for the world of work, unless you're in a kind of a specialist field and you've been to university to study. So you know those bits, but actually you don't know how it works in practice. So, and that makes me think of the ladder of competence. So, you know, you start your world of work, you know, as an unconscious incompetent, and then you work your way up through the ladder to become a conscious competent or an unconscious competent. And then you get promoted and then you slip back down the ladder again. It's like a game of snakes and ladders, really. And so the higher you get, there's more expectation, one, that you put on yourself, and two, that other people put on you. And actually, if you go into a different field of work, then it's very different and you're almost back to square one again. So I worked with a fairly senior nurse back in when I was employed in the NHS, and I'd introduced a coaching training for the staff in my workforce. And she'd taken on this training. It was ILM level 5. And then we had a bit of almost like a supervision session, not that I'm a qualified supervisor. But she said to me, I just feel like I don't know what I'm doing. And I said, okay, when was the last time that you felt like that? If you think about your nursing career. And she went, oh, well, 30 years ago. She said, when I first did my nurse training. And I said, well, exactly. And now this is completely different field of work. You are going to feel like that. And it's going to take some time to feel, you know, more expert. And she said, I just feel like a novice. Yes.
I think not knowing what you're doing, or sometimes having the theory behind what you're supposed to do, but lacking in the practice of it, can sometimes be unsettling and make people nervous and take
Yes.
people out of their comfort zone.
Yeah.
Again, like you saying, well, I can't do this yet, or I don't know how to do this yet. So how am I going to go from not knowing how to do it yet to actually being able to do it? Is
Yes.
some of the steps that is necessary to go from, okay, trying to go from, I don't know, I've got no idea what I'm doing, to actually, I've got this.
Yeah.
And sometimes certain curveballs get thrown at you in the process when you think you just got it, isn't it? Which kind of can lead you to questioning, can I actually do this again? And that's where, if you're working with a coach or you've got a team around you that support you, etc., can come in handy, because it will go, right, okay, you know what, you have got this. And then let's take the curveballs or whatever into context, and then work with it, and then help you on your way. So it touched on a number of ways that we can start breaking down limiting beliefs. And then I think a lot of the time there can be more than one, isn't it? There can be several. Just when you think, okay, I've broken down one or two, others may surface. Because if you have a strong negative inner voice, the moment you silence the on one, the others may pop up and be louder, isn't it?
Yeah. And there's a number of different types associated, or archetypes associated with imposter syndrome. So there's the perfectionist, you know, everything's got to be right. And even if you get good feedback, people will think, oh no, it could have still been better. You know, there's the expert. And I think when you get into a more senior position, that feeling of I must be the expert in everything, you know, really plays loud in what's happening. Instead of, you know, sharing the love with the rest of your team and thinking, okay, well, I've got experts in particular fields in my team that they know way more about that than I do, but being able to harness that. But because we have this level of expectation, the more senior you become, I think that can rear its ugly head in relation to that. And then, of course, there's, you know, the superhuman. We have to be able to do everything and, you know, become people pleasers. And then, so imposter syndrome and those self-limiting beliefs can lead to burnout because of all these things. Everyone's trying to do, way too much in order to prove to themselves and also to prove to others that they are good enough. So, there's many kind of pathways you can go down when you're having that conversation with a coaching client.
It's also very important the fact that it can lead to burnout. Burnout, then you become so exhausted and you almost get grounded to the point where sometimes you can't do anything, or in some severe cases may result in medical illnesses, isn't that? Because sometimes that is the symptoms of burnout. So so how does one stop themselves from getting to a burnout situation as a result of their imposter syndromes or limiting beliefs or any of the archetypes that you've described?
Yeah, so I think knowing you're not alone is really important for people. So as I said, 70 up to 70% of people experience those self-limiting beliefs or that imposter feelings at some point. It's more prevalent in more senior positions. And I think there's an element that the way that we work now, post-COVID, this hybrid way of working, you and I are in our own homes today. So how much do you interact with other people is really important. As humans, we're a very social, we're very social beings, and we have to have that contact with other people. So whether we have introverted tendencies or extroverted tendencies, we still tend to need to have that interaction with people. So, and if you don't have that, you won't realize, one, that other people might be expert in your team, or that other people are experiencing that. And in reality, nobody ever expects you to have it all or to know it all or to be able to do it all. And certainly in the executive teams, that I've worked with, you have a director of finance, you have a director of quality, you have a director of strategy. I couldn't do all of those things, but equally they couldn't do what I do. So you have to be able to work together in order to lead and take forward an organization in that way. You have to do it as a team. And so being able to run things past somebody else is really important. But with that, I think comes a bit of vulnerability. So if we're telling ourselves that we have to be perfect at everything, and how do we balance that against needing to speak to other members of the team? And of course, the more senior you become, the less people there are in your team to kind of to be trusted advisors. And that's why I think coaching has grown quite a lot over the last 20 years or so, really. Because as a coach, we are privileged to be the trusted advisor, even though we're not supposed to be advising when we're coaching, but we're that trusted individual. And I've certainly felt privileged that people have invited me into their world to share their vulnerabilities. But being vulnerable is hard. And again, referring back to Brené Brown, so she talks about that quite a lot and how important that is and how that can build respect in your team as well if you show a bit of vulnerability. And that allows people to be a bit more authentic and real.
I think touching on vulnerability is really important because one of the things you mentioned COVID, but one of the things that COVID showed most of the workforce was that actually at the end of it all, whether it's your CEO, your finance director, or whoever they are, we can all be quite vulnerable. And we can, I mean, when everyone was stuck around their screens with people, suddenly children, cats, dogs, etc., popping in and out of meetings, then suddenly the perfect executive disappears, isn't it? Because they are turning around saying, get out of the room, don't do that, I'm in a meeting.
We all saw that post that went viral with the two little kids that went running into their dad's study and the poor nanny trying to get them back out again. And we went through that period where, neither of us have a blurred background on today, but people had blurred backgrounds because they didn't want people seeing into. Actually, that becomes a talking point, and you can still put it on if you choose not to have people viewing into your life, but it does show we are real people.
Yes. And I think a whole lot of things then led to the fact that actually I can feel comfortable talking about my home life not being perfect.
Yes.
For example, because I've seen you in your meeting and your kids rushing into it and you panicking as much as I would do if my kid was to rush into this meeting and the rest of it. So it is quite important. I mean, one of the tools that I use is emotions and behaviors at work as part of when I'm coaching using emotional intelligence.
Yes.
And really sort of that thing around being aware of how your emotions and behaviors affect others and vice versa, how others' emotions and behaviors may affect you, and collectively how you can affect the team and impact on each other. And a strong part of that is empathy, because if you're aware of your own emotions and behaviors, you are more likely to empathize with others around you when that is necessary or when that is needed, then suddenly it's not too much of whatever to show that you are vulnerable or you are human in the workplace, and that none of us is actually perfect.
Definitely.
Yeah. So we'd like to end these conversations, Linda, with 3 top tips that you may have with for anyone who's looking at how they go from limiting beliefs to building confidence. What will be your top 3 tips?
So I think I've touched on most of these. The last one I haven't mentioned actually, but my kind of takeaway for everybody is to reflect, reframe, and rejoice.
Right.
So reflection I've spoken about, and however that works for you, whether it's journaling or just some self-talk or some post-it notes, but doing that on a fairly regular basis. Reframing, so that I don't know how to do that yet, and thinking about the words you use for yourself, and so reframing things into a more positive light. And the rejoice is to make sure you reward yourself and you acknowledge and rejoicing in the positive things that happen in your day. So, take time to reflect, discipline yourself to reframe, because that takes some hard work and some conscious thought. And don't forget to rejoice in the things that have gone well.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Linda, for joining us today and for sharing with us your insights on how we can go from limiting beliefs to building our confidence. So thank you very much, and really enjoyed the conversation. And thank you everyone for tuning in. We hope you've enjoyed this conversation. Would love to hear your thoughts. If you have any topics that you'd like us to discuss, please do get in touch at hrvoices@hrindependence.co.uk, and we'll do our very best to accommodate your request. And thank you. See you all again soon. Bye.
Thanks for having me, Mary.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of HR Voices. If you have a topic you'd like us to cover or would like to be a guest, we'd love to hear from you. Connect with us on social media or email us at hrvoices@hrindependence.co.uk. Tune in next time.